and welcome to this iMOVE webinar on hydrogen in transport. My name's Ian Christensen. I'm the Managing Director of iMOVE, and I'll be your host for today. Before we get started, just a small housekeeping matter. We were very pleased to get a large number of questions coming through with your registrations, but this webinar is intended to be informative and helpful to you. So I'd encourage you to use the Q&A button if you have any questions coming up during the webinar. We have set aside a period at the end of the webinar for a panel discussion in which you can ask your questions to the panelists. So please be active and put your questions in the interview panel, in the question and answer panel. So hydrogen in transport. So I think everybody in the transport sector is now focused on the role that transport is going to play and the contribution transport is going to make to net zero by 2050, or as maybe the new target will be a 43% reduction by 2030. And we all know that's going to be challenging for transport because we're heavily engaged with petrol and diesel, all of which is carbon emitting. So there's a lot of interest in what the process is going to look like to get ourselves off the petrol addiction. One of the options that is in front of us is to transition to hydrogen. And that's interesting because not very many of us know about hydrogen as a fuel. So today we thought we would start that journey with you and present to you some information from both the truck industry and from the state governments as to how people see the Australian transport sector transitioning to hydrogen. Now, of course, some of you will say, well, what about a battery electric? And yes, absolutely, there will be battery electric too, but the purpose of today's conversation is to explore the hydrogen question. So with no more ado, we shall start, and I'm going to start with presentations from two producers of hydrogen trucks. The first of these is Murray Newton from Hyzon. So Murray is the head of external relations and hydrogen communities at Hyzon, and here to tell us about the Hyzon's development of hydrogen trucks is Murray. Thanks, Murray.
Thanks very much, Ian, and thanks everyone for the opportunity today to address the iMOVE forum. Look, just wanted to, I suppose, just walk through who we are and what work and development that we're doing with our vehicles here in Australia and globally. So just to sort of start off, Hyzon Motors is we are a pure play independent hydrogen mobility company targeting the heavy duty vehicle segment. So our vehicle focus is on heavy duties. We don't have a mix or a product mix of vehicles for light utilities or passenger vehicles. Our core business is on the heavy duty segment. What we are is we are a supplier of trucks, buses and coaches, and that's built on mature global OEM platforms. And the business was formed originally by the parent company Horizon Fuel Cells, who've basically had 18 years of experience in commercial fuel cell development. In July of 2021, we listed on the NASDAQ for a capital raise, which allowed us to further our research and development capability here and overseas. We have globally over 500 vehicles on the road currently, with the majority of those being in China. And coming towards the end of this year, you'll see the first Hyzon fuel cell electric heavy vehicles roll out on Australian roads. We're very well developed from an employee and a capability perspective. We're well over 300 employees worldwide, in the US, in China, in Europe, in Australia and New Zealand, and the Middle East. And we have 4 global manufacturing hubs servicing the 4 key markets. This is sort of an overview of our core business and what we do. So as you see, we are a collaborator. We're an integrator, and we're basically deploying our technology on existing OEM cab chassis and integrating in our technology. So you'll see from a Hyzon and a Horizon perspective, our additions are focused on e-axles, power management software, vehicle control software, and our fuel cell. You'll also see, which I know is a question of most, that we do run a dual system. So we do run hydrogen fuel cell, but obviously an electric drivetrain. So the whole myth around electric versus hydrogen, we are an integrator of both. So we don't see it as we see it as an integrated system. Just wanted to focus on what we're doing here locally, because I think that sort of shows a really good story, particularly from an automotive manufacturing and production standpoint. So people on the webinar might have seen earlier this year that we announced an Australian manufacturing footprint, which will be our focus for development in the Australian New Zealand market. We will be operating out of a 10,000 square metre facility footprint down at Noble Park, which is in Melbourne's southeast, in partnership with the RACV that most people on this call would know. This facility is currently under production. We're operating out of a reduced platform at the moment, but by 2025, this facility will be fully up and operational. We're looking at over 100 local engineering and manufacturing jobs, and also capacity to produce over 1,000 vehicles per annum from 2025 This will just give everyone a bit of an overview of our facility. So our existing footprint, which we are currently operating out of just over 2,000 square metres, is our phase 1 facility. The scaled facility that will be fully operational by the end of 2024 and into 2025 will be 10,000 meters, 10,000 square meters, as I've said, and then also the addition of the asset that we have already announced as well is the development of a green hydrogen refueling depot by the end of 2023. So that will allow us to obviously service our vehicles under production on site, but then also will fuel vehicles that we have committed with our RACV partnership to nationwide towing, and then also looking at other I suppose hydrogen ecosystem opportunities with local council, with neighbouring businesses to, I suppose, tap into the green hydrogen refueling depot. So a lot of things in development.
Marie, sorry to interrupt. I don't think your slides are going through. I sent you a little message, but it doesn't seem to be advancing. Do you want to hop into full screen mode and go through?
I will. Sorry about that. That's, can you see that now?
Yeah, that's going through now.
Yeah. Okay. So, okay. So I can make the presentation available for people afterwards. So look, as I did say, a manufacturing footprint here in Noble Park. This gives everyone a bit of an overview of the footprint and its various stages. So as I touched on before, the development of the green hydrogen refueling depot that we have announced earlier on site, and then our existing footprint phase 1 that we're operating out of currently, and then the 10,000 square metre full facility at scale that will be coming online towards the end of 2024, 2025. And I think, you know, a lot of people within the sector will see hydrogen players jumping up, popping up and down, committing to things. But I just wanted to share these images to show everyone that we are real, we are operating locally. Everyone will see on the top left that these are our fuel cell electric coaches as part of our commercial arrangement with Fortescue Metals that will be delivered to the Pilbara by the end of the year. And the other images show our Mercedes-Benz heavy rigid Iconic platform under development currently in our Noble Park facility. I wanted to touch on our vehicle offer because I would imagine this is quite important to a number of people on this call. We're focused particularly on two platforms. We are basing our Australian operations in the focus of the Hyzon heavy rigid. So this is based off the Mercedes-Benz Iconic platform. And as you'll see in this diagram here, we're looking at garbage trucks, tilt tray, tow trucks, and also concrete aggregates. So we are basing the engineering and the development of the integration of our software and our powertrain into these platforms right here in Melbourne, which is a really exciting story. And Australia, the Australian operation will form the basis of, I suppose, Hyzon's overall export of these particular vehicles overseas. The top vehicle, our cab over, is being developed in Europe. These vehicles are also going to be delivered to some customers of ours in New Zealand in the short term, and that's built off the DAF platform. The vehicle on the bottom right is being designed and fitted in the US, and that will be our Freightliner. That's off the Freightliner Cascadia platform, so our prime mover, and that will form the basis of our heavy haulage development into road trains and line haul, which I know a number of people will be interested in getting into this call as our technology, I suppose, develops and we have the appropriate power systems to function these vehicles. So on that note, I thought I'd just sort of wrap up to keep it short and sweet and allow other presenters, but I hope this gives everyone a bit of I suppose, an update and a bit of a scope about our focus here in Australia in the short to medium term.
Thanks, Murray. That's fantastic. Great to see some real trucks coming off the production line. So the need for hydrogen trucks is present around the world, and so whilst Hyzon is proudly developing its trucks overseas and in Noble Park, others are also active in this space. And so I'd now like to welcome Tim Camilleri from Volvo Group. Now, this is the truck part of Volvo. So Tim is responsible for the e-mobility solutions or emerging technology business development at Volvo Group, and he's going to talk to us about Volvo's emerging hydrogen trucks. Tim.
Hi everyone, thanks for having me. I'm just making sure the slides are coming through as we had some technical difficulties. But as Ian said, my name is Tim Camilleri from Volvo Group Australia as the e-mobility solutions manager. So I'm tasked with bringing the market readiness of our vehicles and the market to be ready for our vehicles as well. So both our electric, hydrogen and autonomous solutions and offerings as well. I thought I'd start here when we talk about the why in which the Volvo Group are doing this. So Volvo Group, and it's at a global level and down to the Australian level as well, have signed up to be the Paris Agreement, so be net zero by 2050. Which is obviously the end goal for us, and what that means is that every decision we make, every bit of R&D we're putting into our vehicles at the moment, or majority of which R&D is going to zero emissions vehicles in its entirety. So for the target you see there on the left, for 50% reduction of emissions by vehicles sold by us by 2030, the components of how that works up is about a 5 to 10% of that is the minimization of emissions from our diesel products. The other 40 to 45% makes up our electric or hydrogen vehicles going forward. So having to hit those targets to make sure that by 2050 we can hit our net zero target. So that's just on our vehicle side of things, and obviously our manufacturing, some of our manufacturing plants are already net zero, zero emissions. So overall, it is a group perspective rather than just the vehicles, but the vehicles do play a vital part in a trucking company. The way in which we do this, deploy this throughout the Volvo Group is CAST strategy, or Common Architecture Shared Technology. So each of the components, and It starts with the electric buses in 2015. I'll elaborate on that, but it moves on. And I think Murray said it quite well, is that then the question comes up a lot. It's not just a hydrogen vehicle. It is an electric vehicle that has a hydrogen fuel cell on it. So, you know, from us anyway, in terms of developing our electrical side of things and buses and construction equipment, trucks, and then with Volvo Penta, with our stationary or marine motors, really, you know, understanding and refining the electrical offering, and then working on the hydrogen on top of that as well. And because they are complementary to one another. Murray, nod your head if you agree, but you know, for us, you know, you being able to charge and charge electricity in the batteries, and then also fill the hydrogen at the same time, really adds a lot of benefit and in the overall offering and operation of these vehicles. So I talked about it at the start, but you know, our journey starts with electric bus prototype in 2015. 2017 was full production of those all electric buses. 2019 was our medium duty trucks offering. And then moving forward from there. So, you know, we've got some 5,000 electrics on the road. We've got a handful of hydrogens on the road in testing, but we're growing from there. So the way in which Volvo sees the market breakup when it comes to vehicle offerings is that there is a split between the electrics and hydrogen for us, and how we see the market. But you know, where electric can do the job and can sustain enough energy or contain enough energy on board to do the job, whether it's a lower mileage or a higher energy use, you know, if the electrics can do the job, then the electrics are sufficient for that. But having the ability to add hydrogen fuel cells and hydrogen storage onto a vehicle on top of that allows for either greater distances or greater energy usage of the vehicle. So, you know, and then in this slide here, we also see our internal combustion engine living on for some time, hopefully with reduced emissions with renewable diesels and the like. So other work where we've got installed both internationally and here in Australia, making sure that this wide offering allows us good support for the transport industry going forward. How that looks overall for us anyways, you know, we have our electric vehicles and our medium duty on the left hand side, our heavy duty in the middle there, but then our hydrogen on the far side. So for us, and way in which we simplify it is a single trailer metro operation will probably be an electric product of ours. Anything not metro or two trailers or more, when our hydrogen will come online, allowing those further distances and those greater weights. So you know, and for us, good bit about timeframes there, and I'll start to talk about why and how those timeframes really shape up for us in terms of how we're going about working on the hydrogen fuel cells. For us, the three key pillars of Volvo are safety, quality, and environmental care. So when it comes to our products, safety is a number one. As the inventors of the 3-point safety seatbelt, safety is always going to be a key part for us. And the other side of things is having an ecosystem that goes around the vehicle. So part of my job is working to break down barriers to make sure these vehicles can come in. But overall, the vehicles have the smart technology and software to simulate and calculate what these vehicles are doing to make sure that you know, the right vehicles put in the right use overall. So that's the way in which we work, and making sure that we can, you know, put those vehicles into a reliable service and to a safe service as well. Safety, obviously never compromise, is one of the three pillars of Volvo, but it, you know, involves training of the drivers. We have EV certified dealers around the nation, and more and more growing and coming online as we go forward with that. But I think the key part I want to talk about today is about road users as well. So the vehicles, the electrics, the hydrogens, they are so quiet. They've been made so quiet. We've actually had to add sound. So making sure those different noises with idling, speeding up, cruising, or reversing, all the rest of it, are broadcast by the vehicle and make sure it's about safety for everyone in and around the vehicles and their uses as well. And then on our tools in which we work to break down the barriers and make the transition as easy as possible, looking to simulate all the different weights and how the vehicle looks like, what body's on it, and energy uses, where it's going, what possibilities are for charging or refueling, and how it's being operated to make sure that we can, you know, as I said, put the right vehicle in the right use case overall. So really breaking that down comes with all of our vehicles, both in a pre-study and what we do with the customer, and then obviously hand it over to the customer as well for them to use and keep on refining their operations. The way in which we're going about our design and the engineering marvel that is the hydrogen fuel cell is in a joint venture with Daimler. So Volvo and Daimler at a global scale are working on it together. About halfway through a 5-year project now in designing the hydrogen fuel cell componentry that we will share and then take into our own chassis packaging. So going along now and going quite well and starting to see a few move from bench testing to first test vehicle mules into full operational test vehicles now, which is quite rewarding to see overall. I'll quickly cover this one, but the video I'll have to show covers it a lot better and is smoother than I do. So overall, as we said, battery vehicle with hydrogen fuel cell, the addition of hydrogen fuel tanks to fuel the fuel cell, and the additional cooling needed to make sure that the vehicle operates and the process is running smoothly. So as I said, had test vehicles up and running. This was our first one based on our normal FH vehicle. You can see the stacks at the back there in the darker blue. And there's at the moment in a single trail operation, but looking to move forward into 2-trailer operation. And I have one video for a minute to show about explaining, I guess, what Murray and I try to so eloquently put together, but I find the videos do it a lot better for us. Sorry, Murray. I hope that sound's coming through.
I don't think there's any sound on that one, Tim.
Oh, well. I'll share a link, but the words are there.
It's got captions though, so.
As I said there, and the top coming up, and regardless of the vehicle, Volvo or Hyzon, but coming up the top of that vehicle is steam, just water. Yes, it looks like an emitter, but no, it is just H2O. So overall, it is a much better vehicle for the environment overall. And the last part I want to touch on before I pass it on to the other presenters is that in the Volvo group overall is in terms of taking on responsibility of circularity and understanding and making sure that all the components as much as possible, whether it's the membranes and the fuel cells, but more specifically probably around the batteries as well, as they live a multitude of lives. So they come out of vehicle and they go to stationary storage, and having a plug-and-play solution for that provided by Volvo to continue the life of those batteries and those minerals going forward, and then understanding and working on to ensure that the recyclability of our batteries is very high as well, so we're not losing too many minerals or energy as they go into a new manufactured life. So, keeping that circularity, and it is sustainable from two factors, being both environmental and financial. So it's not just a battery for the life of a truck of 5 to 8, 10 years, whatever it is, but it lives on from there and gets a true value out of that battery as it moves forward overall. So last one, thank you very much. I'll hand on back to Ian and then I'll await the Q&A at the end. So thank you very much, appreciate it.
Thank you, Tim. Interesting to see the extent to which Volvo's integrating hydrogen, fuel cell, battery and electric. And I think that's going to be a story that will be further elaborated on in the Q&A session. So iMOVE is a cooperative research centre, and in that light, we encourage organisations to take a collaborative approach to problem solving. So it's my very great pleasure to introduce the next two speakers together, because here we have the state of New South Wales collaborating with the state of Victoria to generate a Hume Hydrogen Highway initiative. So to talk about this with us is Kerr, who's the Senior Project Officer at the New South Wales Office of Energy and Climate Change, and Samuel Frisby, who's the Senior Project Officer of the hydrogen team at the Victorian Department of Environment, Land, Water and Planning. And in a very pleasant development, it's clear that the two states, and in fact, I think Queensland also, are working together to help bring hydrogen capability to Australia's transport network. So, Connor and Samuel, over to you.
Thanks, Ian, and for iMOVE for having us. Before I begin, are the slides coming through, and can we see them all good? Perfect. Third time's the charm. So yeah, thank you very much to iMOVE for inviting both New South Wales and Victoria along today. So my name's Kerr. I'm from the Office of Energy and Climate Change within the New South Wales Government, and I'm joined from Sam Frisby from the Department of Environment, Land, Water and Planning within the Victorian Government. And today, yeah, we're really excited to talk through the co-delivered Hume Hydrogen Highway initiative. So it's the nation first hydrogen collaboration program that sees two state governments working together, as Ian eloquently put. So before we get into the Hume Hydrogen Highway initiative, we'd just like to start by providing some broader context on both of our states' policy support for hydrogen. So on the New South Wales side in 2021, we released the New South Wales Hydrogen Strategy, and that's our plan to help industry transform New South Wales into Australia's largest consumer of green hydrogen. So our strategy provides up to $3 billion of incentives for hydrogen, enabling industry to slash the cost of hydrogen to about $2.80 per kilogram by 2030. We've also set a range of stretch targets in our strategy for 2030, which includes a refuelling station target for 100 refuelling stations in New South Wales, and a target for 20% of the government heavy vehicle fleet to transition to hydrogen. So our strategy includes 60 actions. 11 of those are specific to transport, and really are focusing on kickstarting hydrogen use in the hard to abate heavy transport sector specifically. Included in one of those actions is funding support for the rollout of a hydrogen refuelling network along strategic freight corridors. So that's what's brought us to the collaboration with Queensland and Victoria. And as a first step in implementing that portion of our strategy, we've come together with Victoria in a co-funded grants program for the Hume Highway. And that's because we've recognised that a collaborative approach between state governments is really critical to supporting the heavy transport sector's decarbonisation. A highway doesn't stop on New South Wales; it traverses to multiple states, and so that's why we've tried to harmonise our processes and make the delivery of this joint initiative as seamless as possible for those that are looking to join us in developing Australia's first hydrogen highway. So I'll now pass over to Sam Frisby from the Victorian Government, and he'll run through the Victorian Renewable Hydrogen Industry Development Plan.
Thanks, Connor. So similar to New South Wales, Victoria also released their hydrogen industry development plan early last year, so early 2021, and it sort of touches on a lot of similar themes to New South Wales. So it basically outlines how the Victorian government plans to accelerate the development of a renewable hydrogen industry across the state. It identifies a number of key areas where the government is hoping to take a leadership role, and that includes creating long-term jobs through new career pathways and skill clusters, building our skills and capacity in renewable hydrogen, driving innovation and reducing greenhouse gas emissions across some of our hard-to-abate sectors. A key outcome of the plan, which is sort of the catalyst for this program, is aiming to advance the integration of renewable hydrogen with the transport sector. We recognise that hydrogen can provide a zero-emission solution which can be deployed across a number of transport modes, in particular heavy-duty vehicles, to help drive decarbonisation of this emissions-intense sector. So the Hume Hydrogen Highway initiative will help to deliver on that outcome and more broadly supports the implementation of our plan. So we can jump onto the next slide. Thanks, Connor. So before we dive into a bit more detail about the Hume Hydrogen Highway initiative specifically, it's important to understand that that program sits within the broader context of some tri-state collaboration. So you may have seen this map come out in March this year, and also at the same time, you may have seen some pictures of New South Wales, Victorian and Queensland governments all signing a memorandum of understanding to work together towards an East Coast hydrogen refueling network. So the sort of tripartite MOU that underpins this agreement will form the basis for collaboration on the future development of this refueling network, and mainly focusing on key freight routes that link the states. Through the MOU, we've agreed to work collaboratively and share knowledge from our learnings on the Hume Hydrogen Highway initiative, and hopefully use those learnings to inform future policy and also the development of this East Coast network. In particular, this includes exploring additional hydrogen refueling corridors along the Pacific and the Newell highways that link Melbourne all the way through to Brisbane in the later part of this decade. Jump on to the next slide. So now diving into a bit more detail about the HHH, as we like to call it. So in December 2021, New South Wales and Victoria signed another MOU that was very specific to the HHH. So it focused on basically co-designing, co-funding and co-delivering a program that deployed a hydrogen refueling network. So first of its kind in Australia along the Hume Highway. And a key part of that program funding is we recognise that the chicken and egg cycle is that there needs to be funding support for both sides of the equation. So ensuring that we can fund refueling stations and hydrogen-powered trucks to use the network. The heavy transport industry powers both New South Wales and Victoria's economies, and it's also one of our largest sources of greenhouse gas emissions. So that we sort of recognise this as a great opportunity for the state governments to work together on this challenge and come up with a bit of a solution. So it's within that context that the $20 million Hume Hydrogen Highway initiative originated, and the initiative aims to support the establishment of a network along the nation's busiest freight corridor between Sydney and Melbourne. Aiming for the refueling corridor to reduce carbon emissions, improve air quality and reduce vehicle noise on our roads, grow and diversify the economy by creating new jobs, and hopefully catalyse further public and private investment into hydrogen refueling infrastructure to help establish an East Coast refueling network. And you can sort of already see the benefit from that with the Commonwealth governments driving the nation and election commitment. The initiative aims to support the development of a demonstration network of at least 4 renewable hydrogen refueling stations and at least 25 hydrogen-powered trucks to use the network. Jump on to the next slide. So the initiative has the following objectives. So to accelerate the development of a renewable hydrogen economy in New South Wales and Victoria, promoting decarbonisation of the transport sector and supporting the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions in both states, promoting the heavy transport sector as a key offtake for renewable hydrogen, building the foundational local knowledge, skills, infrastructure and supply chains to drive large-scale market activation, leveraging match funding to create new jobs and capital investment in both states, and generate and share knowledge that demonstrates a repeatable and scalable commercial model for hydrogen refueling. So we're hoping that last one is all about how do we take the Hume and how do we roll it out to other key freight corridors that link our states. So I'll now pass back to Connor to dive into a bit more detail on the initiative and things for potential applicants to be aware of.
Thanks, Sam. So yeah, the Hume Hydrogen Highway initiative is a competitive grant program. It's open to all market participants. We've published on the initiative website a clear set of guidance in the form of application guidelines, so that they really talk through all the content that we've talked to today and more. And to achieve those objectives that Sam just ran through before, we're strongly encouraging potential applicants to apply or consider applying as a consortium, with one organisation taking the role of a lead applicant or a prime. And so we anticipate that consortia will be needed and that it'll need to be comprised of numerous market participants, comprising the necessary capabilities and capacity to meet our objectives and our project parameters. So a consortia could look like, it doesn't necessarily need to look like this, but it could include a refueling station operator, at least one freight or logistics operator, a hydrogen truck OEM, and a freight customer. And so just noting that consortia can include other entities based upon other commercial structures that are proposed by the applicant. So this may include more than one freight operator included in the consortium. It could also include hydrogen producers and project developers. So we are really open to any other alternative integrated structures and consortium member contributions that come forward. And so that figure on the right here is just provided as an example, just noting that applicants can propose alternative arrangements that still support our initiative objectives. In terms of what we're looking for in projects, there are 8 key project parameters, and these are thoroughly described in section 4 of our application guidelines. I'll quickly just run through them now, but as I mentioned before, the guidelines talk through all these in thorough detail. So the first one is the hydrogen refueling station parameter, and this outlines that proposals must include a minimum of 2 open access stations in both New South Wales and Victoria to provide full coverage of the Hume Highway for hydrogen powered trucks travelling both north and south. In terms of the hydrogen trucks, we've outlined that proposals should include at least 25 hydrogen powered trucks, with higher merit proposals demonstrating higher emissions reduction potential in those vehicles. In terms of refueling capacity, so that parameter requires that proposals must ensure there will be sufficient refueling capacity for heavy vehicles along the corridor. So we're looking for people to demonstrate how that refueling capacity of each station cumulatively provides a full coverage of the Sydney to Melbourne corridor. In terms of supplying those stations, what we've required is that it's renewable hydrogen, and it's the only colour of hydrogen that's permitted under this initiative. That renewable hydrogen can be sourced through either hydrogen supply agreements, or it can be sourced from on-site hydrogen generation at the stations. In terms of scalability, we're looking for applicants to demonstrate a credible pathway to scale refueling capacity. So we're hoping that people can demonstrate that they're looking to support greater numbers of hydrogen heavy vehicles beyond that initial deployment of 25 grant-supported trucks. Similarly, the future-proofing parameter outlines that applications that demonstrate a consideration for broader zero emissions transport will also be considered higher merit. So what we mean there is that someone that includes evidence of additional planning for future electric vehicle charging infrastructure at the same station, that's something that we'll be considering higher merit. And in terms of timing, we're looking for the Hume Hydrogen Highway, the Triple H, to be operational by the middle of 2025. And just the last point is regards in terms of funding. So the $20 million program sees New South Wales and Victoria both committing $10 million each. And we're looking to match funding from industry up to a maximum of 50% of the project's eligible expenditure. In terms of the key dates for industry to be aware of for the Triple H program, so we've opened for applications on the 18th of July, and that application period will close at 2 p.m. on the 28th of October in a couple of months' time. After the applications close, we'll then move into an assessment period and then seek approvals for the grant award at the beginning of next year. So we're targeting for the successful applicants and unsuccessful applicants to be notified in around February of next year. That will allow us to then execute a funding agreement with the successful applicant and keeps us on track for the HHH to be operational around the middle of the decade. Lastly, I'll just pass back over to Sam, who will just run through the useful contacts for the initiative and where you can find further information.
Thanks, Connor. So we've got a couple of email addresses. The most important one is hydrogen@planning.newsouthwales.gov.au. So that's the email address for any questions regarding the initiative, application guidelines, or assessment process. And we encourage you, if you have any questions today that we can't answer in the Q&A, to jump on that email address and send them through. The second email, grantsinfo@delp.vic.gov.au, is very specific to the actual online application portal and difficulties with submission. You also would have heard us referring to the initiative website in this presentation. So for this initiative, the joint initiative website is the www.energy.vic.gov.au grants/Hume Hydrogen Highway. So on this website, you'll find application guidelines, frequently asked questions, and sort of anything else required to make an application. Further information on both New South Wales and Victoria's hydrogen policies, the websites are also listed there, so visit them for any sort of further information needed. And just in reference to the Q&A coming up, we'll do our best to answer any questions asked today, but we just make a note that we are in the middle of a live grant application process, so we needed to adhere to any probity protocols to ensure our initiative is run as a fair, transparent and open grants program. What that means is that there may be some questions we can't answer in this forum. So if that's the case, we encourage you to jump onto that first email address and shoot them through following the session. So appreciate you all listening.
Thanks, Connor, and thanks, Samuel. It's great to see the states working together and working on the chicken and egg problem. It's really difficult if you're a fleet owner to see how you're going to engage with the new technology if there's no fueling capability. So that's really exciting to see. So we now have some time for questions and answers, and I invite you to put your thinking caps on, type them into the Q&A box, and we'll share them around the panel. And to that panel, I would like to also add or introduce you to Leanne Breger, who's the Programs Director at iMOVE. And so Leanne sits across our whole project portfolio, and we're keenly interested in developing additional projects in hydrogen or in any other aspect of transport that you think need to be done. So you're welcome to also make suggestions or ask questions to iMOVE through Leanne, as well as to our other panelists. So there were a number of questions that came through with your registrations, and we'll try to get to them. There have been already some questions into the question and answer box, and some of those have been answered directly, and we'll try to get through to the rest. But just to get things started, I'm going to ask of Murray and Tim, what pressure hydrogen, or what state of hydrogen pressure tank are you intending to have on the vehicles? Typically, the industry debates around 350 bar or 700 bar or liquid hydrogen or whatever, and there are pros and cons for each of those things, but it's important because it will also affect the infrastructure that's going to be needed at the refueling stations up and down the Hydrogen Hume Highway. So my question, Murray and Tim, hydrogen pressure vessels, what is the sensible operating range for a hydrogen truck?
Ian, not my area of expertise, but I'll give it a shot. Look, we're operating our systems at 350. I suppose our position on this is that, when you look at the input into the fuel cell, it will be run at 15 bar. So our argument, I suppose from our perspective, it's not just about, there's an assumption that you increase up to 700 bar, you're going to get more mileage. Our systems, the input in through the fuel cell is at 15. So at the moment, I suppose my official answer is that it doesn't, if it's 350 or 500 or 700, our systems can cater for all, but we're looking at it at that 350 bar at the moment.
Yeah.
My answer to the question is I don't think there's a right, range, obviously. Volvo Group, we're at 700, going for 700 for that density and having more energy on board to make sure we get those delineation between the electrics to have more energy on board. And that'll be the initial offering, and then looking into liquefaction into the future. And also currently looking into liquefaction now to see how that applies into the future.
Yeah, it's the same with some development that we're doing in the US around liquefaction too.
So while we're on the truck question in particular, Murray and Tim, do you have any comment to the sort of the set of questions that are coming through around axle loading, truck mass, truck dimensions, and the like? Sam and Connor, if you've got a sort of a perspective from the road, from a road operator perspective on that, happy to hear that as well. But to the trucks first.
Yeah, so from our perspective, obviously, yes, there are. I did see that question pop up. There are some challenges around particularly front axle with some platforms, but I suppose we look at it from a weight perspective as a whole vehicle when you have a diesel engine versus, you know, an electric or a battery engine. So there are some weight, there are some, you know, there's an ability to strip out weight, but we've had some really positives. I'll leave it at a high level. We've had some really positive discussions with government authorities around that, particularly that front axle. And we're hopeful if we are bringing and scaling up these products to the Australian market, that government will be cognizant and sort of open their eyes to some potential reforms in this space. And I know particularly through other heavy vehicle industry associations and whatnot, it's definitely something that we're working on at the moment.
And I'll echo Murray's comments about that. I think overall the industry is doing quite well in giving that advisory and what's required. And you know, anecdotally on our vehicles, our medium duty vehicles are, you know, 1.5 tons heavier than their diesel equivalents. Our heavy duty electrics are 2.5 tons, and then our hydrogen vehicles are more than that, again, heavier than their diesel equivalents. So to recuperate, you know, that lost payload effectively and that lost performance, you know, there needs to be some concession available for these vehicles to run them on the road. You know, and operators, they intend to have a fair comparison against their diesel equivalents. But it is progressing well, I'll say, and it's good to see the entire industry, both from a manufacturer's point of view, but the government bodies and the industry groups, councils, working together on the same thing. So it's a nice one to be a part of.
Super. So I was going to ask a question about when all this is going to happen, but you panelists have kindly sort of shared that one on the way. So I might go somewhere a little bit different. I can still vaguely remember doing experiments at high school on making hydrogen in a test tube and then sticking a match at the front and it goes pop. So are there safety issues that we need to elevate into this discussion as we contemplate using hydrogen as an energy source for our transport sector?
I'll go first, I think, overall, because that's a tricky one. But overall, I think, you know, it comes to the vehicle side of things, and there's no compromise in terms of the safety. A lot of the timing in which, you know, it's taking us to get these right and have them commercially available. Like we have an operating vehicle right now doing exactly as intended, but getting it right and having that time to get it right and make sure the quality and safety is high is obviously on the vehicle side of things. But you know, pressurized vessels in general, yes, it is a relatively new material that we're working with, but overall we've done it with they would half do it with diesel, we do it with LPG. You know, there are considerations we make, but there are also a lot of lessons already learned that can be transposed into these as well. It does need to be thought about, but we do have time overall. I'm not sure when you're going to have your first commercially available products in the market, but we do have a few years to getting it right and learning from those who've come before us, either in other materials or in Europe and America, where it is moving forward faster.
Yeah, no, Tim, to echo what you're saying, I mean, we're working obviously with governments and first responders. You know, there's a lot of interest out there, particularly as more of these vehicles roll out into the road. And I think also there's obviously us being a local manufacturer, there are conditions around safety in our production facility and whatnot. So we're working through that. And I think also the other thing that's sort of coming that not a lot of people are talking about is around that after sales component as well. So, you know, existing fleet operators, whether you've got your maintenance in-house, if you're outsourcing your maintenance locally, there's a whole raft of, you know, certification to safety provisions that needs to be discussed. And I think the key challenge for us as an industry is around where is that being led? You know, it's sort of being led by one jurisdiction over the next. You know, what we really need is a national approach that aligns, obviously, you know, safety, but then also training and maintenance to ensure, you know, we have the right ticket certification. You know, 1,000 volts for operating with you know, hydrogen fuel cell electric platforms. So I think a lot of that work it's starting, but it does really need to accelerate. You know, as more vehicles will hit the road, you know, from our perspective later this year.
Yeah, thanks for that. So I'm going to ask you a sort of double-barrel question here to pick up a couple of threads. So the first barrel is to Sam and Connor about, so you're looking for 25 hydrogen-powered trucks to participate in, as a minimum, in this this initiative. And I think you're hoping that this initiative is going to be up and running by 2025. I'd like you in a minute to reflect on what you anticipate is the likely growth trajectory for truck participation on either the Hume Highway or even more generally in transport. So that it's a sort of look into the future. But the other side of my question is, so when I last checked, the cost of a hydrogen truck was, I don't know, sometimes about twice or three times the cost of a diesel truck. And whilst I can understand that it's new tech and the costs of the tech have to be recovered and and so on, if I'm a truck operator, I'm really going to struggle to be motivated to buy a new truck for 3 times the price of the old truck and to put it into service. So what are we going to do about the motivation of the industry to come on board to buy the new tech, and how will that play into the evolution of the vehicle? So back to Sam and Connor first. When you look in your crystal ball for the popularity of or the utilization of hydrogen trucks, what do you see? And then we'll come to everybody to reflect on how we might cover the gap in motivation to actually adopt the new tech.
It's a great question. And Connor, I know New South Wales has some sort of targets you can probably talk to. So I might just have a quick go at that first part of the question. So really good question. Obviously, with the Hume Hydrogen Highway, hopefully up and running sort of mid-2025 with a, fleet of 25 trucks, really hope to see things scale up relatively quickly after there. I know so obviously Tim showed, when their Volvo are looking to have vehicles available, a lot of that is from 2025, 2026 onwards. So hoping by that, by the time we get this demonstration network up and running, there's a lot more OEMs who have trucks available and people can see the sort of technology rolling around and are actually in a position then to make some sort of informed decisions about their own fleets. So we're hoping sort of second half of this decade is a sort of, real scaling moment. I think the other way to think about it is, if we're targeting net zero by 2050, a lot of these vehicles have long asset lives, 20 years sort of thing. So you start working backwards from there, and some of these companies with emissions reduction targets are going to need to start making some decisions about their fleet sort of the back half of this decade as well. So there's sort of a few key components aligning, I think, to see some scaling happening before 2030 and definitely through the 2030s as well. Connor?
Yeah, no, it's a very interesting question, Ian, and it's a very valid point that there is a significant capital cost delta between an incumbent technology and the zero emission, tech that is on its way, and that's really one of the key areas that has brought us to design the HHH, is really trying to accelerate that and encourage and put Australia on the map for international OEMs to really start bringing out models and vehicles into the Australian market. And yeah, in the design phase, we also contemplated and we understood that it is quite a difficult thing for a freight operator to take this leap, particularly when the nature of the Australian freight sector is that there are lots of small operators and the bigger operators don't actually represent, the majority. What we're envisioning is that the HHH and the programs that will follow really will seed a second-hand market as well, which will help provide a more affordable option and an entry path for other freight operators to really test out what does a hydrogen vehicle look like, how does it compare to their current technology, and for them individually to be able to then plan how do they decarbonize and what's their pathway forward as well.
Murray and Tim, would you like to reflect on the cost of transition?
Yeah, look, I mean, I just want to say that I think, governments right across Australia have sort of dipped their toe in the water in relation to, subsidising or supporting, trials or ones and twos when it comes to sort of vehicle subsidies. And I think if government can, true to their word, and they apply what they're applying with this hydrogen highway from a scale, in a sense of, a 25 vehicle fleet, and they look at other opportunities where they can, I suppose, step in and support, whether it be the cost differential or providing an easier landing for industry, I think that will start to move the dial. And I think so, and I think that will convince a lot of the operators that we're talking to who want to transition but are put off, obviously, by the cost difference, as you rightly said, Ian. With the 3 times the price, we think we'll see that price come down, obviously, from an economy of scale perspective. And then also there's that whole argument that we've been talking around the TCO, so the total cost of ownership of the vehicle, when you factor in the potential price of hydrogen, the reduction in maintenance, and the ability that we've got around, buybacks and whatnot. So we're trying to also, we're not just wanting to rely on government, we're trying to provide a bit of a softer landing for industry as well.
Just to add to that, Murray, there is a fair amount of total cost of ownership interest in our partner base as well, and we're seeing a whole lot of activity happening in that space. So traditional business cases that have been executed on up until now are going to have to be slightly different. Total cost of ownership metrics are emerging.
So we're pushing up against time here a little bit, and so we're not going to be able to get to all the questions that have been asked in this session. We will endeavour to procure answers for all the people that asked the question, but we'd also. Ooh, we got some background, and so I'd also encourage you to reach out to the presenters if you have a question that's specifically directed to one or another. The presentations we made available to you after this, and the recording of this webinar will make its way onto the iMOVE website in the fullness of time. So as we are 2 minutes to go, I wonder if there's one more question. So perhaps just from a state government point of view, are there regulatory issues that we need to deal with in advance of or to facilitate the deployment of even initial hydrogen vehicles onto our roads?
Yeah, it's a
good question. Also, Connor, you can go first if you like.
This is the issue when you have 2 state governments. We're both too eager to answer at the same time. And it's a great question. And as Murray and Tim have alluded to, the answer there and the path forward is to really take a collaborative approach with industry, so that internal government regulators and policy teams like Sam and myself, we're aware of what's coming. And fortunately, in the hydrogen landscape, it does sit within the broader context of the National Hydrogen Strategy, which has committed all states and jurisdictions to work on a broader legislative review piece. And so hydrogen transport applications are considered under that. But it is something that the HHH has brought forward. Some of these, Murray's been talking about some of the ADR issues at the moment. So we're also looking to work with the regulators and to work with industry and make sure that everyone is prepared for what's coming and the transition ahead.
That's super. So as we wrap up, as I indicated at the beginning, today's session was about hydrogen and the role that hydrogen might be able to contribute to the decarbonisation of transport. But clearly there are a lot of other things going on as well, and battery electric is going to have a role to play, and especially at the smaller and middle end of the transport scale. So our guided by some of the questions that are being asked and the level of interest in this webinar, we're strongly contemplating running a second webinar, probably to look at the comparison between the merits of hydrogen and battery electric, and potentially also looking at the application of both those technologies to bus transport. So watch this space. I thank you all for your time, and I thank the panelists for their important contribution to this discussion. It's a question and a subject on everybody's lips, and we'll be watching this space with great interest. Thanks very much. Have a great afternoon.